Hey everyone, how's it going? Matthew Bailey Media here, and welcome to another Top Things video. Now, it's been a long time since I did one of these, and that's mainly because the fact that it's now the end of the year almost, I decided that I'm going to start off with doing my top 10 worst movies of 2024. Now, before I get into it, I do want to mention that out of all the movies, which includes the dishonorable mentions, everything up until number 6 is not a bad film per se, but I still feel like they didn't do as good of a job for me as I wanted them to. So, I'll get into the top 10 in a minute, but before I do, I want to get a shout out to a few dishonorable mentions, those being Descendants 4, The Rise of Red, Despicable Me 4, and IF, which is basically an abbreviation for Imaginary Friends with Ryan Reynolds. So those are my 3 dishonorable mentions. So without further ado, let's get into my list for the top 10 worst movies of 2024. Okay, so at number 10, like I said, 10 to 6 is not as good movies as I wanted them to be, but still not a great film. So number 10 is the Garfield movie. Yep, that's the animated version of Garfield that came out right around Memorial Day weekend this year, back in May. And I will admit, Chris Pratt did not do a bad job voicing Garfield. I will admit that. He didn't do a bad job. I think in my opinion, I think he was a little bit better than Bill Murray, in my opinion. I think I only ever saw the first Garfield movie with Bill Murray in it. I know there's a second one, but I don't think I saw that, per se. And, so there's that. And with the way they told the story of, Garfield actually getting found by his biological father and who was voiced by Samuel L. Jackson, which I thought was pretty crazy. The way they did the story was interesting, but I don't know. I honestly don't know where they thought they were gonna go from there, and that's why I thought this movie. Again, I feel like if they ever decided to try to redo an animated version of Garfield, they need to come up with like a better story for it. So there's that, and anyways, like I said, the Garfield movie was definitely not a bad film in my opinion. So for number 9, I gotta go with a movie that honestly I love. I've grown up with this franchise, and when I heard that they were doing a live action Netflix related movie based on this, I thought maybe this might turn out well, and then it turns out it wasn't so well, and that of course is Saving Bikini Bottom, the Sandy Cheeks movie. Now it's funny because when I did my review of this movie, I noticed that video got a ton of views. Thank you guys for that. But I will admit that the only thing I liked about the movie per se was them actually introducing Sandy Cheeks' actual like legit family from Texas, because we don't know why she and also why she went down to live in Bikini Bottom in the first place. We know now why this whole movie sort of addresses that, and I can understand that. But then when they reveal the true villain of the movie and what their intentions are, I thought that doesn't make any sense. But with the way and how the villain looked, and I just thought it was a pretty poorly thought out story. But again, the whole concept of introducing Sandy Cheeks' actual squirrel family and what they did in their lives, and as well as why Sandy was even going down to Bikini Bottom in the first place. I loved those concepts, but I feel like the villain and the motive and stuff was just out of left field, and I don't understand why this movie even came out. So for number 9, I gotta go with the Sandy Cheeks movie, Saving Bikini Bottom. So for number 8, this movie is based off of a book that I actually grew up reading. At least I think I grew up with this book series, and that is, of course, Harold and the Purple Crayon. Now, this sort of takes the concepts of the original books that were just drawn in a purple crayon, and the kid actually grows up into Zachary Levi, of course, but he somehow makes it into the real world, and the main reason why he goes into the real world is to find out what happened to the narrator of his world, and it turns out that what he finds out is pretty, not good, and that's all I'm going to say without spoiling the movie. But now I will admit, Zachary Levi did the best he could portraying this character of Harold, especially when its original concept was 2D, or like a hand-drawn stuff, and there was barely any color. So that's how that whole thing went down. But honestly, I feel like there are some things that don't fit well in adaptations, and I think this movie was one of them. So for number 8, I gotta go with Harold and the Purple Crayon. So for number 7, I literally just saw this movie a couple weeks ago, and I will admit, I think out of all the movies that this movie is based within, I think this was the best one out of them, but it still wasn't as good of a movie as I wanted it to be, and that is, of course, Kraven the Hunter. Yep, Kraven the Hunter is my number 7, and like I said, Aaron Taylor Johnson tried to do the best he could at portraying the character, but because his movie and the other 2 movies that are going to be on this list too, unfortunately, did not feature any Spider-Man centered story where they were fighting off against Spider-Man, it's no wonder these movies are doing such a bad job at the box office. Because there are so many movies that have come out in the Sony Spider-Man universe that have no Spider-Man. And unless you want to count a movie that is going to be on this list later, that honestly, those aren't really Spider-Man per se. They're just variants of Spider-Man, but in the form of women. You probably know what I'm referring to, but we'll get to that movie later. But with Kraven the Hunter, I just don't understand why they kept trying to continue on into the Sony universe. It sounds like they're trying to work with Marvel now to fully focus more on the Spider-Man centered movies in the MCU, which hopefully they stick to that. But we'll see what happens. So for number 7, I have Kraven the Hunter. So for my number 6 movie, this is another of the 3 Sony-related Spider-Man movies, and that is, of course, Venom: The Last Dance. Now, I will admit, I think out of all the Venom movies, this one is probably my second favorite out of the 3. My least favorite was Let There Be Carnage, and my first favorite was obviously the first movie. But with Venom: The Last Dance, I don't know why they tried so hard to completely rehash the little post-credit scene they had at the end of Let There Be Carnage, and then they had that scene at the end of No Way Home, and he goes right back to his universe, and it made it seem like we were gonna be seeing something like that, but then it turns out the way they started The Last Dance was just like a complete retcon of what was done at the end of No Way Home. However, they're saying that the symbiote piece is still there in the 616 universe. It just the way they made him go back was completely strange, and the fact that the bartender was played by the same actor from No Way Home is pretty crazy. And not to mention, we had another MCU actor make an appearance in this movie. That being, I forgot the name of the actor, but he plays what's his name, Mordo, or the guy who was in the first Doctor Strange movie, that first Strange. But yeah, his actor was in this movie, and I don't know what the point of his character was, in my opinion. But like I said, Venom is definitely a lot better though than the last Spider-Man movie that we have on this list. But for number 6, I gotta go with Venom: The Last Dance. Okay, so we have now reached the top 5 worst movies, and at number 5, this is a movie I did not think was gonna be in this list, but honestly, with the way they ended this movie, I'm just thinking, what the was that ending? And that is, of course, Joker 2, aka Joker Folie à Deux. Now I will admit, I think when I did my best films of 2019, I think I had Joker 1 in my top movies of that year. because it was a pretty good film, I will admit. It told a good origin story for Joker, and I feel like they should have just ended it there. But of course, they had to bring in the character of Harley Quinn, and this time she was portrayed by Lady Gaga and not Margot Robbie. And I will admit, I think Lady Gaga's version of Harley Quinn was, I think, the only good thing about this movie. That's the one thing I will admit. Not even Joaquin Phoenix's Joker was that good, and because the way they ended the movie, I guess I can spoil the movie a little bit, but basically they make it to where he doesn't even want to be the Joker. He doesn't like the chaos. He wants to just move on with his life and get arrested and just get it over with. But of course, some random guy in his prison decides to shank him and actually make it seem like he's the new Joker. And that's the one thing that really pissed off a lot of fans of the first movie, and that's why this movie is unfortunately at my number 5 worst of the year. So for number 4, this is a movie that I actually went to see with my cousin Tyler a couple of months way back in, I believe it was February of this year, and that is of course Argylle. Now, Argylle is sort of tells the story of an author who doesn't realize that her characters are real, and she's trying to do something. I forgot exactly what the story was. That tells you how much I didn't remember about this movie and why I hated it so much. But I gotta tell you, Argylle, I mean, I feel like it was kind of trying to give Mission Impossible and National Treasure vibes rolled into one, in my opinion, but honestly, it just did not work, and that's why Argylle is at my number 4. So, for my number 3, like I said, this is the last of the 3 movies that came out from this franchise, and that is, of course, Madame Web. Yep, Madame Web. What do I gotta say about this movie? The way they did this whole film, it's like they only had one character that was actually looking like Spider-Man, but in reality it was just some bad guy who had a way darker version of the costume to look like Spider-Man, and all he was trying to do was go after these 3 innocent girls that are apparently going to eventually become Spider people. And that's why I said they didn't have any Spider-Men per se. They were all women, and plus they were barely in their outfits or whatever at all during the movie. The only time they had them was in freaking flash vision sequences, like not actual clips. There were not any actual scenes of them in their outfits unless they was in a vision or a flashback kind of thing. And that's why, and I swear, that's what Sony really needs to work on if they ever decided to reboot this franchise and do a completely different Spider-Man than Tom Holland, or whatever, to keep him in the MCU. I feel like they need to frickin' stop making their trailers look so falsely advertising. Because that's what they did. They made the girls look like they were in their outfits in the movie throughout the whole movie, and that's not the case. So, anyways, for number 3, I gotta go with Madame Web. Okay, so for number 2, honestly, I thought that this was gonna be my number 1 of the year when I first saw it, until I actually saw what my number 1 movie is, which I will discuss it later. But for number 2, I gotta go with the movie Megamind versus the Doom Syndicate. Now, this is a movie that was released straight to Peacock, unfortunately. Now, I don't have Peacock anymore. Maybe I'll decide to get it back eventually. But with Megamind vs. the Doom Syndicate, this was supposed to be like a second installment to the movie Megamind from DreamWorks back in, I forgot what year. I think it was at least the last 10 years, maybe. 10, 13 years. But basically, this whole movie was sort of like the animation was downgraded, the characters were dumbed down, and none of the original actors came back to voice the characters, which sucks. And of course they tried to make it more modern or whatever. Like they literally had a character who was trying to be like Roxanne Ritchie or whatever, or Roxanne, and where she's like she's doing like this streaming thing on her phone. That's what really sort of got me so frustrated with this film. And I gotta say, I'm glad they released it to Peacock, but they made it seem like there was a third movie in the works, and I highly doubt they're gonna do it because of how poorly rated this movie was. So for number 2, I gotta go with Megamind versus the Doom Syndicate. Okay, so finally for my number 1 worst movie of the year, this is another movie that I actually saw with my cousin and actually my other YouTube friend Matthew Davis Media. I believe we all went to see this movie together, and I gotta admit, I did not expect for this movie to bomb so bad at the box office, but it did, and that is, of course, Borderlands. Yep, Borderlands is. I never played the games, but I heard that the stories that they told within them were pretty crazy, but I will say though that the actors they got to play some of these characters though did not look like the characters at all, especially Cate Blanchett. I think she was the one character who did not look like, who was way too old to be playing her character to begin with, as far as I'm aware. And there were so many other characters that were featured in this movie that I don't understand what was the point of them being in this movie. So, and the way they told the story, again, it was mainly centered around Cate Blanchett's character, and I gotta say, the way she had her story arc and the fact that she was too old of an actress to be playing this character just shows you how poorly written and poorly executed this movie was. So I feel like there's never going to be another Borderlands movie until they decide to completely reboot the series after this failed attempt. So for number 1, I have to go with Borderlands. So there you have it, everybody. Those are my top 10 worst movies of 2024, as well as 3 dishonorable mentions, which is crazy because usually I would do 2 dishonorable mentions, and I had 3 honorable mentions on my best films of the year list, which I will still be posting hopefully before the end of this month. But unfortunately, the things were not. There were so, like I said, there were so many films that I didn't know if I would be able to do it in the opposite order. So, anyways, without confusing anybody too much, so like I said, that's my list of the worst movies of the year. If you have your own, put your list of worst movies of the year in the comments section. And again, this is just my opinion. If y'all don't agree with that, that's totally fine with me. So anyways, that's all for now in this top things video. And like I said, I will be doing my best films of the year list soon, so keep an eye out for that video. And I will see all of you guys in the next video.